Hello, my friends. It's my great pleasure today, privilege, to speak to Dermot Whelan. And we're going to talk a little bit about his book, Mindful. And it's a #1 bestseller. And I have been reading it with a lot of enjoyment. So I thought I'd share some of the insights that we can glean from this great book from Dermot Whelan, who I've had the pleasure of meeting even recently when I was in Ireland. So anyway, thanks for joining us, Dermot. How are you?
Thank you, Deepak. I'm very well, thanks. Happy New Year to you and all your viewers and listeners. I'm delighted to be seeing you again.
Yeah,
I feel like I've been hanging out with you because I've been tucking into this over Christmas.
Oh, God.
And delighted to say I finished it, and really wonderful. So congratulations on Quantum Body. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
A lot of people actually roll up their eyes when I talk quantum. So I hope it made some sense to you.
It did, absolutely. I just love how it's bridging the old world and the new world, and the sheer potential of all that.
Yeah. So let's talk about you and the book. I had the pleasure of spending some time with you. You moderated the panel in Dublin with good humor and a lot of insight. And you're basically a comedian by profession, right?
Yeah, that's right. I've been a stand-up comic for nearly 20 years. For over 20 years, I've been on the radio as well here in Ireland. And I recently just left the radio. It was a big career move for me in the last few months. But in recent years, I've begun to blend stand-up comedy with meditation teaching. I trained as a teacher in 2018. So my two worlds combined. For many years, they felt to me like they were opposite sides of a coin. And I always wondered how they were going to mesh, this kind of performer jazz hands side of me, and also I guess the more private, spiritual, quieter side of me. So I'm delighted to say that over the last few years, through my book and through my live shows, I've blended stand-up comedy with meditation training. And I guess my goal with all of this is to make this stuff as accessible as possible. I guess, obviously, like you have done so well over the decades, you've introduced so many new people to this, and that's my goal as well, is to bring in the most cynical, the most reluctant, and everybody from all walks of life. Whether that's somebody driving a dumper truck or a busy lawyer or a school teacher, a mom, whatever that happens to be. So I just the more I got into this stuff over the years, I became frustrated that it wasn't being presented in a simplified manner so that everybody could relate to it. So that's why I ended up writing my book, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing these days.
So before we get into the book and how you ended up writing it and some of the chapter headlines here, which are very interesting and very insightful, I wanted to ask you something. My personal observation with a lot of professional comedians, and I know a lot of them, some very famous and some not so famous, but I've kind of found that they've struggled with depression. Is that a good impression, or am I misled in that thinking?
I don't think you're misled. I think sometimes it's a bit of a stereotype almost. And I guess stereotypes emerge because there's some truth in there. And certainly I would have experienced, anxiety myself and met, have spoken to other comedians about that. It's an interesting one, and it's something I've actually discussed with other comedians over the years and wondered, what is this? And my whole journey with meditation began back in 2007 when I had a panic attack on the way to perform at a comedy festival. And it wasn't quite it was a very dramatic entrance in the back of an ambulance with sirens and flashing lights, but it looked quite showbiz actually. But it wasn't quite what I had in mind. And what that led me to was having conversations with other comedians going, I don't even know what a panic attack is until the guy in the ambulance told me. And I was surprised by how many said, well, actually, yeah, that's something I deal with. And I guess, but there's a lot of anxiety. Sometimes, we do experience depression as well. So it's an interesting one. I in my experience, I think a lot of comedians have that sensation that I think other people who aren't comedians have as well. But the feeling that you're driving with one foot on your accelerator and one foot on the brake. And by that, I mean, you can feel overwhelming shyness, lack of self-belief, not a huge amount of confidence. But at the same time, you have this, invisible hand in the center of your back that is pushing you onto a stage and asking you to perform. And you get this sort of dissonance that's there. And you tend to experience really intense highs from performance. And, I always see stand-up comedy much like an extreme sport. It's like jumping out of an airplane. You get that massive rush of adrenaline and cortisol, and it's all very exciting, but then you have the down. So I think by its very nature, stand-up comedy, it brings you to those highs, but it also brings you to those lows as well. And if you're starting off doing it from a point that isn't particularly stable, I think you're going to feel the turbulence from that journey and from those highs and lows. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's definitely something that comedians themselves are aware of.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question, but before that, when you said you didn't know it was called a panic attack, what did you think you were having in that ambulance?
Well, literally, I was driving and I began to feel this huge pressure on my chest and my belly. And I ended up having to get out of the car, and I was lying on the side of the road, gasping for breath. And I literally thought I was having a stroke or a heart attack. Not that I knew what either of those things felt like, because I thankfully had never had them before. But I remember my brother-in-law was with me, and I got him to call my wife at the time because I was thinking these could be my last words. But because my carbon dioxide and oxygen levels were so skewy from, the panicked breathing of the whole affair, my parts of my body started to go into spasm. And one of those muscles that went into spasm was my tongue and my jaw. So as I was trying to say, really poignant, meaningful words that would stay with my wife forever before I left, the planet, all she could hear was me kind of going, and there was nothing coherent coming out at all. So I guess at the time I didn't know what was happening, and I was very concerned that it was something that that was life-threatening. But once the paramedics, basically, I joke about it in my live show that they had this amazing piece of life-saving equipment on that ambulance that I needed that day. I was very lucky that they had, and that was a brown paper bag, because I found myself breathing into the brown paper bag. Not quite sure if it was an official Irish Health Service bag or one that had sandwiches in it quite recently, because it still smelt of the ham sandwiches that were in it probably 10 minutes before it got to me. But that's all I needed to kind of bring my breathing and my body back into equilibrium. But I guess, it planted a seed that day. And I, up until that point, had been pretty cynical about things like meditation, or I guess ignorant more than anything. But it set me on a path, and I ended up meeting a lovely lady quite by chance, called Siobhan McKenna, who had trained at the Chopra Center, actually. And she had asked me just to MC her book launch, just to be there to welcome people. But as we got chatting, I found out that she was teaching meditation to the Irish police force. And that kind of caught me by surprise. And I was going, okay, maybe there's more to this. You know, the police see stressful events on a day-to-day basis, you know, and they're obviously reaching for tools that they feel can help them. So why don't I give this thing a go? You know, I always fantasize about someday being stopped at a motorway checkpoint by a member of the Irish police force, or the Gardaí, as they're called here. You know, and one of them who has done the training leans in the window and, you know, asks me to blow into the bag to check my alcohol levels and goes, I need you to blow into this. Take a deep breath. That's it. Relax your shoulders. Let the tension go. Now forgive your mother. I'm hoping that someday I come across one of those members of the police force who take meditation to the next level. But that's what got me going, and that's what got me interested, and I never look back, as they say.
So that leads me to what is going to be my follow-up question. Is humor the answer to existential crises in a way? Is it peculiarly human? Do other animals display any sense of humor, dogs or cats or any other species, monkeys, primates? Because, you know, when I see humor, it's kind of always addresses contradiction, paradox, ambiguity, uncertainty. All of those things come into a joke. If you have to explain a joke to somebody, then it's not a joke anymore. But when you kind of, your soul gets the contradiction of existence, you know, suffering and joy, up and down, hot and cold, birth and death, there's no choice other than to have a good laugh.
I think one of the gifts that comedy or humor gives us is the ability to step back from what you're experiencing. Even for an example, I was talking about my panic attack, you know, back in 2007. That was a traumatic experience for me. I literally thought I was dying. But the fact that I was able to build that into a comedy routine gives me that distance. And, you know, I think a lot of the time, you know, what causes us that suffering is being down in the weeds with whatever we're feeling or whatever we're experiencing or whatever we're worried about. So the minute we start to tell a story or to see humor in something that we're experiencing, even if it is troubling, I think it gives us that separation. It gives us the ability to step back and to observe what's happening. And that humor gives us that distance, you know. And I guess there's also the gift of shared experience. You know, if you're in an audience and you're listening to a comedian who's bringing up stuff for you that could be troubling, you know, that could be, you know, pointing out things in your relationship that you're not particularly happy with, or your job or your life or whatever it is, but that shared experience of laughter, and again being able to look at it through the lens of, I'm not alone in this. I think that's a great gift as well. And it's just a marvelous tool for diffusing our own sense of self-importance as well, you know. And I think in a social media driven world, we can be almost find ourselves sort of moved on to that motorway of self-importance that, you know, that we all find ourselves on, and we're documenting every aspect of our life and putting up all our achievements. And, you know, humor has a great way of just diffusing that. And particularly Irish people, I'm here in Dublin right now. Irish people just love they love nothing more than taking you down a peg or two, and you know, removing any sense of grandioseness that you may have acquired over time. So, you know, I think there's lots of gifts there. And certainly for me, humor has been a remarkable tool. And just to watch it, you know, when I do my live shows, my last tour was Mindful, the live show, as opposed to the book. And, you know, to watch that, you know, a lot of the audience would never have dabbled in meditation. They would never have gone near it. There would be a lot of sort of those the resistant men with their arms folded going, "You're not going to get through to me." And sometimes there might be people in the audience who literally were dragged there. I open my show with, who's here to experience incredible enlightenment, and some of the hands go up, and who's here because they were dragged here by someone who's sick of their shit. And more hands go up. So, what humor can do, it diffuses that resistance, and you can see their bodies soften, and you can see their minds open. And it's not that they're suddenly going to be levitating, a few hours later, or meditating for an hour every morning for the rest of their lives after the show. But what it does is it gets them to the doorway, and they're willing to open the door. Whatever happens after that is up to them and a whole lot of other things. But I see how humor can diffuse that resistance in people to gravitate towards something that they know on some level they need, but maybe the way that it has been presented to them up to that point was something that they just couldn't relate to.
Many times when you talk about spirituality, people kind of almost equate spiritual practice with seriousness. The more serious you are, the more spiritual you become, sort of, is the perception. And yet, I think you just said something very important. Seriousness is a sign of self-importance. It's the very opposite of spirituality. And yet, we look at monks and dressed in robes or pastors in church talking about guilt and shame and all of that with a lot of seriousness, and which is the very opposite of the lightness of being that we associate with spirit. So I personally agree with you that humor is a spiritual experience more than going to church, for example, with all your seriousness. But do other animals like mammals and monkeys and primates, do they play pranks, or is it uniquely human in your opinion?
I think if anybody owns a dog, for instance, I think we'll know that our dogs have a sense of humor. The way they'll fling their toys at you while you're trying to watch, the latest episode of Succession or whatever it happens to be. The fact that my dog manages to find the one bit of couch that doesn't have a cover on it and covers it in mud, I think, is a sign that he is definitely playing a joke on me, or else he just doesn't like me very much. But yeah, I think, I guess it's a question of where does playfulness end and comedy or humor begin, or where do they cross over? I like to think that animals have a sense of humor. As a man who gets berated by his teenage children a lot for watching too many funny dog videos, I'm utterly convinced that dogs in particular are capable of a sense of humor, and whether they're mimicking us or just tapping into their own source of infinite humor, I'm not so sure, but I like to think so.
My very special guest today is Dermot Whelan, who's written this book, Mindful. And, I see all these little suggestions for laughter here: frantic, busy, de-stress your life. Dad, didn't put the bins out, etc. So tell me a little bit about, you said you just left doing your radio show. So what are you doing now, mostly?
Good question. That's what I ask myself every morning. What am I doing now? I guess I've been lucky enough over the last few years to be teaching meditation in many different ways. So I've been doing it online. I've been doing it in the corporate world. And I think people can be cynical about companies sometimes in terms of that maybe it's a box ticking exercise, or that, they just want to be seen to be doing something. But some of the most engaging and rewarding and fruitful experiences I've had as a meditation teacher and funniest moments have been in companies, and I think people forget that behind the logos and the products and the marketing, that these are just big groups of people. There are people with mortgages and children and busy lives, and they want to be able to navigate their jobs and enjoy their jobs, and get that sense of fulfillment out of those jobs. And I think companies are a lovely place to start to foster some of that self-awareness and self-care, and introduce people through comedy. Again, it doesn't have to be a comedy club or a theater. It can happen in a canteen of a company. It doesn't really matter. So I guess that's something I'm very passionate about. I'm going to be writing another book this year. There's going to be another live tour. I'm bringing a bunch of meditators up Kilimanjaro later this month. So I'm very excited about that as well. So I guess I've just doubled down on blending my passions, and that is comedy and meditation. And I want to reach as many people as I can, and because I know the benefits myself, and I just get such joy out of seeing people who, as I said, maybe wouldn't have gravitated towards this stuff, suddenly just taking that step through the door. I get so much out of that. So that's kind of what I'm doing. And then I'm trying to play golf in between showers of freezing rain. That's kind of my life at the moment.
So let me read some of the chapter headlines, and maybe you'll comment on each one of them a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. Don't let me die in Mullinavat. That's, I guess, clearly Irish, right?
Mullinavat. Yes,
Understand.
it's a very unremarkable town. No offense to the people of Mullinavat who may see this, but it's in County Kilkenny. And I guess it's a lovely place, but this is where I had the famous panic attack at the side of the road, and was convinced that this is where I was going to leave the earth and everything that I knew. But thankfully it didn't work out that way. So yes, Mullinavat is a place in County Kilkenny.
Stand up and fall down.
Yeah, I guess that's my journey into stand-up comedy. And I guess just to circle back a little bit to what I was talking about, that feeling of having one foot on the brake and one foot on the accelerator. I was always a remarkably shy person. Other than with my closest friends. I used to blush. I was one of those painful blushers where it literally looks like you're turning into a red beacon if somebody talks to you that you weren't expecting. I used to sweat all the time from anxiety. I was just the least likely person, I in my mind, to jump up on a stage, even though I was always a bit of an impressionist and a joker as well. So I guess that contradiction, and I think a lot of people feel that in their lives as well. They may have this massive desire to give presentations in work, or to put themselves out there, but at the same time they feel like this invisible force is pulling them back. And certainly that was the case for me, and until I pushed myself through. But if you're not finding something that can keep your nervous system in check and can give you some mental tools to reach for when you are feeling that stress, then the wheels are going to come off. And they did for me in Mullinavat and in other ways too.
Karaoke stairs of death.
Yes, these were these are the little moments where the universe will whisper to you first. And, if you're busy, you may not hear those whispers. And then every now and again, they'll start to maybe shout a little louder at you. And if you're still ignoring it, then sometimes the invisible hand of fate can step in. And I found myself falling down after an afternoon of the ancient Irish art of day drinking. I fell down the stairs of a karaoke club. It's so glamorous, Deepak. I'm sure you've done it yourself. But I managed to knock myself out, and I wasn't in great shape. So I guess, those things are, again, at the time, it wasn't too pleasant, but being able to look at these things through a lens of humor can give you some insights. And, if you think back to it, for most of us, stress management is demonstrated to us by the grown-ups around us when we're small, and for me, it was alcohol, nicotine, and giving out to yourself. Those were the things that I saw, on a daily basis in my house growing up. So it's natural that I and anybody else who grew up around that would reach for those things, when they're feeling stress, and at the time I was doing breakfast radio, so I was quite sleep deprived as well. But when you reach for those things in excess, sometimes you fall down the stairs of a karaoke club. And actually, ironically, as my head hit the wall, the hen party that was singing in the other room were literally singing "It's Raining Men." And indeed it was. Well, one man down a fair few flights of stairs. And very glamorously, I stuck a champagne glass that I had in my hand into my forehead. It was a night to remember and forget.
You probably know this, but I went to school in India, and the school was run by Irish Christian brothers, and next door was a convent. So I became very familiar with the rituals of Catholicism, with the nuns, with the priests, with the alcohol, with all of that, and also with the amazing education, that I received. So Irish culture was always fascinating to me. On the one hand, a lot of booze, as you just mentioned. On the other hand, lots of humor. And then also a lot of guilt and shame perpetuated in the name of religion. So I think Ireland is a land of contradictions, hence the humor. Hence, I remember doing an interview with somebody from the Irish Times 20 years ago. And, during the interview, this young man probably had 8 or 9 alcoholic beverages of all kinds, including cognac and whiskey and Irish whiskey. And just watching him, I felt drunk, but he was totally sober. And he did an amazing article the next day as well. So what's so special about Ireland in this respect?
Special is one way of putting it.
Well, right now I also see that Ireland is one of the countries that's slowly kind of dissociating itself from organized religion. Is that true, or is that just an impression?
Yes. I think there's been a lot of pushback, even your mention of the Christian Brothers there. If you say Christian Brothers in Ireland, there's a sort of a bit of an uncomfortableness, because the abuse, the clerical abuse that emerged in Ireland over the last 20 years, has been so pervasive and so overwhelmingly horrifying for so many people that they literally just drop their faith there and then. If you go into a church, a Catholic church on a Sunday here in Ireland, pretty much everybody there is going to be probably over 60 or 70, and the crowds will be, maybe a 20th of what they would have been even 15 years ago. So there's been a big push away from that. And, you can't blame people for feeling that, and that feeling of betrayal, that because they would have literally, is there anything more personal than investing, your own faith in an organization or something you believe in? That said, when you move away from that, what's left? What fills that hole? And in Ireland, alcohol has always been an issue. It's always been something that filled a hole of some kind. And, you can blame it on colonization, or, the years of famine, or, the abuse of our culture over centuries, the removal of our language, forced emigration, all these things are going to provide excuses are reasons for people to lean on certain crutches, and alcohol is certainly one of those things. But I guess the great opportunity here, though, is with the likes of meditation, with this kind of work that you've been doing for so long. These are the things that can give people a home for this spiritual drive, for this inner longing to be part of something bigger, and that's why I think now is even more of an important time to be trying to open up people's minds to this stuff, because literally in the length of one breath, you can give someone that sense of connection that maybe they miss because they don't go to mass anymore.
In all honesty, I have to say that I never personally experienced any trauma uh, during my education from the Christian Brothers. If anything, I experienced a lot of discipline and hard work, and I didn't mind that because it made me who I am today. So I still have great gratitude to my Irish teachers. I should say that for the record.
And you're not alone, Deepak. And I think it is important to say that, because there are many, many people that, myself included. I went to a Jesuit school, secondary school here in Ireland, in Limerick, called Crescent College Comprehensive. And I benefited greatly from those years in those schools, and a lot of people have. Unfortunately, there were a lot of people, directly or indirectly, who were affected, in much more negative ways. And I guess that's what causes that ripple out into society in general. But I think the man who interviewed you and had a skinful, as we say here in Ireland, during working hours, I would say that's that killer combination of journalist and Irishman. And it literally is a killer combo, because you don't last very long.
The nun on the end of my bed. What's that about?
The nun on the end of my bed was actually it's alcohol related, actually, because it was a phrase that a friend of mine who went to that school with me coined for the feeling of terror when you wake up, after a particularly heavy night or weekend, and that the feeling that there's a nun sitting on the end of your bed who's just waiting for you to wake up. And as soon as you open an eye, it just gives you a judgmental look and goes, "Oh, so you decided to wake up, did you?" And that's that sense of anxiety and fear, whether drink related or not. And I think for me, it was just a general sense of that there was an invisible scorekeeper in my life that was constantly marking me down for things that I perceived that I was failing at. And the nun on the end of the bed, I guess, is a symbol for for that sense of self-judgment we can have, that there's, I don't know why I was a nun. I was never taught by nuns. I don't have any ill feelings towards nuns. My aunt was a nun, but I guess in a way it must be some kind of subconscious authority figure. But that nun on the end of the bed analogy really resonated with me, that that we can feel like whatever it looks like to you, none or otherwise, we can have that sense of self-judgment and that feeling of never doing enough, never getting enough done. And as our worlds get busier, that's for sure, we can constantly feel like we're not doing enough, we're not getting enough done. We look at social media and everyone seems to be winning at everything, and maybe our lives don't look as glamorous. So the nun on the end of the bed is something that in some ways I think we all experience sometimes. Just at a particular time in my life, it was quite intense.
A very special guest is Dermot Whelan. He's the author of Mindful, a very interesting book, very characteristically told with lightheartedness, humor, and yet quite profound. I'm not going to read the rest of the chapters. I want you to pick it up and read it yourself. But Dermot, what do you hope people will get out of reading your book? Those who haven't been, we're now, this forum is international. Many people haven't been to your shows or enjoyed your humor. But this book is meant for those outside of Ireland as well. So what is your hope that this book will achieve for somebody who is not familiar with your comedy shows?
I hope that the book is that doorway for people, that maybe meditation or that world is something that you've skirted around before. Maybe you felt that it wasn't for you. Maybe you felt it's been marketed to people that don't represent you. The things, the myths that I try and bust about meditation are those very images you see if you Google meditation. You're going to see really beautiful people in incredibly beautiful locations. It's always a wooden jetty on the edge of a lake or the top of a mountain, and I look at that wooden jetty and I go, that's not Ireland, because if that was Ireland, that jetty would be so rotten from constant rain that whoever's sitting on it would be at the bottom of that lake, not meditating, and the mountaintop always makes me laugh as well. It's like, I don't know about you, but when I'm stressed, the last thing I want to do is run up, the nearest mountain and crawl out onto a crumbling rock face, a foot and a half from certain depth, and close my eyes. It's not particularly relaxing. So, I hope the book reassures people that, meditation can be whatever you want it to be. And it's not for an exclusive set of people in really expensive Lululemon yoga pants. It is, for whoever you happen to be. And, whether you're brand new to it, whether maybe you've dabbled in it in the past, but felt like it didn't click, I like to bust the myth that, that just because you have thoughts, you're doing it wrong. Absolutely not. We've 80,000 thoughts going through our heads every single day. If you have thoughts, it doesn't mean you can't meditate, or you're no good at it, or you're doing it wrong. So it's to reassure people, as I say, who've never done it, maybe have done a bit of it, or maybe who want to approach the whole area with a bit more lightness, a bit more smile, a bit more laughter, because, that's when we're in touch with our own inner laughter, with our own inner humor, with that sense of playful creativity. That's who we really are. That's us at our happiest. That's when the filters of worry and anxiety and self-judgment and nuns on the end of your bed are removed, and we get to just be ourselves. So I hope it's a doorway for people into a place that's a little bit more fun, a little bit more peaceful, and a little bit more themselves.
And a little more playful too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, playfulness is massive in so many ways. And again, we get serious as grown-ups, and we feel that I remember a pivotal moment when I was in school. I think I talk about this in the book, actually. And I was kind of jumping around. I'd say I was 14 or so. And I was always a bit of a lively child. And I remember I was jumping around, and one of the girls in the class turned around to me and said, "Would you ever grow up?" And I remember that moment always stuck with me. And I was like, oh, so being playful isn't being grown up. And I think a lot of us, whether it's something like that, or, an authority figure or whatever it is, that playfulness sometimes is sort of just either gently drained out of us or knocked out of us. And we can lose touch with it. But that's, again, where that fizz, that sense of fizz, I'm always saying that to my wife. We like to kind of reassure each other, and someday we go, "Oh my God, I've got the fizz. Have you got the fizz?" And sometimes it's enough if just one of us has the fizz, and we kind of feed off that. And that fizz comes from playfulness. It comes from being a bit silly sometimes, and again, not taking yourself so seriously and the things you have to do so seriously. And it can have incredible benefits. One of the things that came out of the pandemic for me, if there were any positives to come out of that, was the fact that I started middle-aged skateboarding at the very start of lockdown. And it had the most wonderful effect on me. The streets were empty, so, I killed less people as I skated around, which was handy. But what I realized, there were these interesting byproducts of, yes, I was experiencing that fizz, and I was feeling playful, and I was doing something new and something that I had always wanted to do as a kid. But actually, one of the surprising things was that when I went back into work, I was so much more creative. I was so much more into my job. I was so much more up for it every day, and my energy levels were higher. And it seemed to be coming from the skateboarding, and I couldn't work it out. I was like, but this has nothing to do with my job. And I think that's the secret. Because I was standing on a plank of wood with wheels on it, trying not to kill myself. I guess I was using, you know more about this than me, but I was using different parts of my brain. I was using, that mind-body connection. I was using that whole area in a different way. And I guess I was just giving my brain a break from all the regular stuff that, had been wearing it down every day, and easing myself out of those ruts that maybe I was in. So, sometimes I think we can look to our job to solve everything for us and to fulfill us in every single way, to give us creativity and friendship and money. But actually, sometimes it's the silly, playful thing you do outside of your job, even for 20 minutes or half an hour, that suddenly reignites that passion for, the reasons why you started that job in the first place. So playfulness is really important, and something we can tap into it at any moment.
My very special guest today has been Dermot Whelan. He's a stand-up comic. He's written this extraordinary book, which I hope you'll pick up, Mindful. And he talks a lot about what meditation is and what it isn't. There's a very beautiful chapter here that starts off with a little story, but I'm not going to give it away right now. Whelan, right now, Dermot rather, right now, if you look at the world, all these world leaders, from Putin to Trump to whoever, it doesn't matter. The world is in a very precarious position. Climate change, war, terrorism, social, economic injustice, mechanized ways of killing each other, and leaders globally who are only interested in power mongering, cronyism, corruption, influence peddling, self-importance, and seriousness, in all fairness. What do you think is wrong with the world right now, and especially the way global leadership is going? Is it lack of humor? Is it lack of playfulness? Is it self-importance? Is it seriousness? I mean, it looks like the way the world is going right now, we are headed to extinction with climate change, lack of sustainability, both biological, chronic disease, lack of joy, lack of humor. What's going on, and what is the solution, if any?
I'm not sure if humor alone is the solution. And you're right; these are seriously challenging times at the moment. It's also interesting just to even see what's happening online, in terms of, the wars that are happening in Ukraine and in Palestine. And for some, some people want to be just embedded in that news feed 24/7, and that's how they feel they can contribute. And other people want to take a step back and say, my nervous system isn't capable of handling all this 24/7 news feed. I think people are struggling at the moment to know how to deal with everything that's going on. Do we keep our heads in the sand, and try and stay happy, or do we go all in and immerse ourselves in that and see if there's anything we can change from the inside? It's the loss of touch with ourselves is massive, I think. The disconnect that so many of us have, whether, I can't speak for world leaders because I'm not one, but there's an overwhelming sense of busyness and detachment at the moment, just in the world generally. And I'm sure you come across it yourself. We seem to just spend all our days telling everyone how busy we are and how wrecked we are. That seems to be our pastime these days. And I think that's indicative of the fact that we've lost touch with that sense of who we are inside. And maybe the demise of religion has something to do with that. Maybe people feeling they don't have that spiritual space anymore. Maybe there's desensitization to violence through the media that we devour every day on our devices and televisions and things, that maybe we just don't take violence so seriously anymore. We're not as afraid of it as maybe we should be. But, you know, what do we do? How do we fix it? I don't know. I wish I did. If I knew, you know, I'd be running out into the streets and shouting it from the rooftops. I think all we can do, you know, and that's, I'm not blowing smoke, but that's why I think works like your book are so important at the moment. It's about changing things at a much deeper, profound level than just, you know, fighting around and scrambling around in the weeds. The more we can tap into that real depth that's there, that we know is there, that depth between breaths, between words, between musical notes, you know, between bouts of busyness, the more time we can get in there, you know, I really do believe we can make change. If you look at those transcendental meditation studies, you know, that have been done over the last 30 years, there's been 28 different studies published in reputable journals about the power and potential of group meditation to lower crime rates, to reduce deaths in war zones, to reduce incidents of injury through war. You know, this stuff is moving as far beyond the woo-woo, you know, into the physical world, into science. And maybe science is slow to catch up, but, you know, late's better, you know, better late than never, as they say. So I think the more we can access our own quantum levels, the more we can access our own stillness, that ripple effect has to be felt. I really, if you don't believe that, then what do we have? You know, even looking at Zelensky in the Ukraine, he's a former stand-up comedian, you know, who went into politics. And now I guess sometimes he wishes he was back standing on a stage, as difficult as that may have felt for him at some points. You know, it's almost a reversal of humor there. And I guess he's wondering, how does he bring his playful, humorous approach to the awful things that they're dealing with over there. So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I don't know what we do, but I really believe that the more we can tap into that inner stillness, that silence, it's not a cliche, it's not woo-woo, it's not fluff, it's real, it's there, it has potential to change things at a very profound level. And, you know, one by one, bean by bean, we fill that sack. So if we can do that, that's where I would hope that the change we need will come from, because we need that change, don't we?
My very special guest has been Dermot Whelan. The book is called Mindful. Pick it up. You might change the way you look at life, and you might also have a bit of a laugh and become a true leader in your own life, in your family, perhaps for the world. This has been a very interesting, reflective conversation. I thank you, Dermot. Good luck with your next project and your trip to Mount Kilimanjaro. And I hope to see you again, if not in Ireland, somewhere. Thanks for joining
me. Thank you, Deepak. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.